It was a really tense time for Dorset Police. We had to find that device.
Police and military personnel searching for an explosive device said to have been placed in the area. So far, nothing's been found.
But as the search entered its second day, shocked detectives feared the worst.
Everybody that was working in Ferndown at that time, they were convinced that actually the bomb had gone off.
All the police resources went running round there responding to this, and it turned out it was a couple of young apprentices who had exploded some hydrogen balloons from a local garage, and they thought it was a bit of a giggle.
On the 7th of December, 3 days into the search, Sally wrote again. The apprentices were not the only ones who were hoaxing.
He explained in his letter that we could stand down, that he actually hadn't deployed a device, but if we stalled, there was always the threat.
This time, the bomber had been bluffing. Next time, the police might not be so lucky.
We deployed additional overt high visibility patrols. We put out bomb casts to respond to calls from the public in relation to suspect devices. So we provided everything that we could in reassuring the public that we were taking this matter extremely seriously.
But as the police stepped up their public presence, their undercover operation yielded a significant breakthrough. Sally's latest letter, which revealed that the pipe bomb was a hoax, had been traced back to the Bradpole Road postbox.
I knew on this occasion I had very good footage. I knew that hopefully that we'd be able to identify him from it.
But the bomber was not the only person to have used the postbox that day.
Unfortunately, this is the run-up to Christmas, and during the period that Sally posted, he was one of 38 posters who posted between them 172 letters. So it then became a very difficult problem to try and identify which poster was Sally.
I had 38 images, so I knew that one of those people was our offender. That was the frustration.
Catching the bomber was made more difficult by Royal Mail rules preventing the police opening any of the posted letters.
The Queen's Post is sacrosanct. We couldn't delay it, we couldn't interfere with it at all. So we had probably a matter of 5–10 minutes to try and gain as much information as we could from the letters before they had to go on their way.
Before the letters were sorted, officers copied all the addresses on the envelopes. Once they'd been delivered, they contacted the recipients, pretending to be managers from the Royal Mail.
We explained that there was a problem with the mail in that area, and could they just tell us who had sent that letter in order that we could make inquiries with them.
As detectives worked their way through the addresses, surveillance officers kept watch on the postbox.
My view was certainly that a lot of those 38 would be regulars that live in the local area or pass that way regularly and use that postbox.
When one of the suspects was spotted, the police were ready to act.
We did that through various means, actual physical surveillance, following people from the postbox. Some actually walked back to their home address, which was nice and easy for us, or back to a motor vehicle so we could obtain a registration number.
But such close surveillance was risky.
Of course, if Sally becomes aware of our interest before we get to him, he can destroy any of the evidence that maybe he's got within his home.
DSI James knew any error now could spell disaster.
This inquiry now was close to being 6 months old. We'd received maybe 20–25 letters. We'd sent coded messages. We'd received incendiary devices. We'd had threats that garden bombs had been placed in gardens. This was a crucial period of time for us. The level of tension was very high.
In late December, as officers watched the postbox, they made an identification that they hoped would never happen.
One of the 38 posters was a local police officer that worked within Bournemouth.
Just as the investigators had feared, it appeared that the bomber might be one of their own. 5 months into the hunt for the Tesco bomber, detectives were finally closing in. They knew the bomber was one of 38 people captured on tape using the Bradpole Road postbox in Bournemouth. But as they continued the stakeout, they made a disturbing discovery. One of their suspects was a police officer.
We had been concerned that a police officer may have been involved because of the use of jargon that indicated perhaps somebody had knowledge of the law.
If the bomber was an officer from the Dorset force, he might even have inside information about the investigation.
That became even more relevant when we identified that he was a local police officer that worked within Bournemouth, and we became very interested in him.
The officer was duly interrogated by detectives. But within hours, it became clear he was not the man they were looking for.
He was totally innocent, and it was just by pure coincidence that he happened to post a letter.
With the police officer in the clear, detectives concentrated on narrowing down their list of suspects further.
We identified a small number of persons fairly quickly, particularly those who were writing to businesses and companies. But we were left with a small number of individuals we hadn't been able to identify.
After weeks of work, police had eliminated all but 9 of the people who'd used the Bradpole Road postbox. And on the 17th of February, the number of suspects dropped to just 1.
We noticed one of the people that we were trying to identify walking along the service road carrying a plastic petrol can. At that time, there was a filling station at the end of the service road. Didn't need to be a rocket scientist to work out that he'd probably been to the garage.
The filling station's CCTV cameras showed a scruffy, middle-aged white man at the counter.
Officers established that, in fact, our poster had purchased petrol at that station and had paid by cheque.
The cheque was traced to a 50-year-old unemployed electrician from the Kinson area of Bournemouth. His name was Robert Edward Dyer.
We carried out surveillance in the hope that maybe he would post a letter, that he would show some interest in Tesco's, maybe visit Tesco's stores. Unfortunately, that didn't happen.
Dyer, who had no previous convictions, spent much of his time visiting his elderly mother and carrying out errands. On 2 occasions, police filmed him driving in the vicinity of Bradpole Road. Both times, Dyer did nothing to arouse suspicion.
At that stage, this individual wasn't of any great significance. At the end of the day, I made the decision that we would go and knock on his door and carry out a procedure that we'd done with many of the other posters before.
To eliminate suspects, police used a specialised software program to examine their home computers.
It was a case of inserting a disk into the computer. That would then search their hard drive looking for specific words. And if it found any of those words, it would display on the screen the actual document that it related to.
On February the 19th, officers called at Dyer's home in Caroline Road.
When I went in, it was quite a small bungalow. It was a 2-bedroom bungalow. Jeff and Paul sat in the lounge with Mr. Dyer, and they started asking him where he was on certain dates and things like that. I went into his bedroom where he had a computer and started the scan process. It was quite a sombre type of atmosphere within the actual bungalow itself. It wasn't long before it indicated that it had found some of the words and displayed on the screen a whole demand letter. From walking in the door to suddenly sitting in a room by myself thinking, this is where we are, Mr. Dyer is the offender. That was quite some moment. It was quite strange, really, because there was no real reaction. He was very quiet, didn't say anything, and just remained emotionless, really.
I get a phone call from the team. I thought they were trying to wind me up. But it was the man, and we actually had found Sally.
After a 6-month campaign of terror, the hunt for the Tesco bomber was finally over.
We interviewed Mr. Dyer for a number of days and gave him the opportunity to give his account.
What I can't understand at the moment is you can't remember sitting at the computer drafting this letter.
I don't understand it either, but that is the case.
He made no direct admissions when questions were put to him about his commission of the offence.
You might not understand why you did it, but I think you remember doing it.
No. I don't understand either.
But while Dyer refused to admit his guilt, the police discovered more damning evidence against him.
I was involved in the search of Dyer's home address. In the kitchen of the premises, I took apart the gas boiler and stuffed in the works of the boiler. I found a folded up piece of paper, which in fact turned out to be the coded notes. It was in his own handwriting, and the code was unique to this case.
On the same day that Dyer's cipher code was discovered, the last of the Tesco bomber's letters was intercepted by the police. Surveillance footage showed Dyer posting it 24 hours before his arrest. The letter exactly matched the document found on his home computer.
He carried out everything that he did from home. He had a shed which he'd set up to allow him to make the devices. He was an individual working on his own, in desperate need of money and believing that Tesco's were the answer to all his problems.
As Dyer's interrogation continued, it emerged that he had read up on the extortion cases the police had previously identified.
Dyer, on one occasion, had sat in a doctor's surgery. There was a copy of the Reader's Digest, and contained within was the story of the Mardi Gras bomber, and that was his inspiration to carry out his offence.
Police also discovered why he had used a female alias.
We found out that the connection to Sally was that once he had a dog called Sally.
On the 4th of May 2001, Robert Edward Dyer appeared at Dorchester Crown Court. He pleaded guilty to 9 counts of blackmail and 1 of common assault for sending the letter bomb. He was jailed for 16 years, later reduced to 12 on appeal. Bournemouth could breathe easily again.
We ran, I think, 7 pages in the newspaper. We could then tell the story of how the Echo had helped Dorset Police to actually nail him.
His motivation was purely a financial one. He's an incredibly dangerous man.
He had no real connection with Tesco. I think he saw Tesco as the gravy train. He was lucky that no one died or was seriously injured.
He made a number of simple mistakes. And whereas people might think in the future they could copy this offence, this is a very difficult type of offence to carry out, and if you try it, you will be caught.
To this day, no extortion attempt against a British supermarket has ever succeeded.